This puts God in what I call an impossible dilemma. He created man and woman to multiply and fill and rule. And we learn from Isaiah 46, 10 and 11 that nothing can stop the purposes of God. So how in the world will the man and the woman continue this when it also says that if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall surely die? Now, this sounds like a really hard job to me. So how God is, to be true to his justice, needs to issue the death penalty. But he's also merciful as a father and creator. How does he continue forth with their mandate to multiply and fill and rule if they're dead? God seems to have painted himself in a horrible corner, except that there's one thing that God can do that nobody else can do. And the answer to God's impossible dilemma is found in the very first verse of the Bible, that in the beginning God created out of nothing the heavens and the earth. That means that God is the only one who could issue the death penalty and assuage his justice and then say, oh, by the way, come back to life and resurrect that man to start a new life and a new line, a new creation, and so assuage his mercy. And so this now becomes typecast for the storyline and how the drama of the scriptures work. In Genesis 3:15, God pronounces over the serpent, saying that I will put enmity is war and hatred. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and hers. And he, referring to a male child that will come from the woman, he will crush your head and you will bruise or strike his heel. Genesis 3:15 is the key verse for understanding the purpose of Jesus Christ, who he was and what he had come to do. 1 John 3:8 says simply that Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil. It's the New Testament's way of simply saying that the head of the serpent is going to be crushed. Enmity, a war between the two seeds, means that the storyline of the Bible is going to be tracing the war between light and darkness. And we're going to trace this theme all the way through the scriptures, ending tomorrow at about 3 o'clock, when we're going to see that God finally breaks the power of evil, and we are going to spend eternity living with him. The crushing of the serpent's head will ultimately happen at the crucifixion of Christ, but it is inaugurated in the Christ event, where it says in the Gospels that the strong man had been bound, and the commission of Jesus was that we would go out and plunder now his goods. Jesus said, he came to destroy the works of the devil, as I just mentioned, but also the church is going to continue the crushing ministry of Jesus, as Paul says in Romans chapter 16, that the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. So important is this theme or motif of life out of death that God builds it into nature itself. I grew up in the Midwest, and we knew fall was the time when all the leaves fell and everything broke down, and then you headed into winter and everything became dead. But out of the deadness of the fallen leaves would emerge now the fertilizer that created an incredible spring. And so all of humanity, if they just look at nature, knows that life comes out of death. Only if a seed falls in the ground and dies first will it bring forth new life. And so God built this motif into nature itself. And so nature itself is pointing to the fact that the key to life is a death and a resurrection. And people that are looking astutely at nature will understand this and know this. But the story doesn't end there. It says that Adam and Eve did not die that day in the garden for some reason. It says that God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them. This implies that there was an animal that died instead of them. And here we get the idea of something is being substituted for the man and the woman. Even though the man and the woman deserved to die, a substitutionary death in some form was being made for them. And their nakedness is covered in the provision of that sacrifice. Later on in the New Testament, Paul will talk about being in Christ. It's just covered in his sacrifice, wrapped in his sacrifice. And when God looks at us, he sees us in the righteousness of Christ. But the man and the woman were expulsed from the garden, banished from the presence of God. In the storyline of the Bible, the key question, Stephen Stills asked it so long ago in my era, we got to get back to the garden. How do you do that? Well, it wasn't sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I can assure you that. And so the storyline of the Bible is, how do we get back into God's presence in the Garden of Eden? How do we restore two-way communication with God, intimacy with God? And so we're going to see now the motifs of creation, fall, exile, redemption, and new creation, traveling all the way through the storyline of the Scriptures. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up the pace, and we're going to start tracing the storyline through the Old Testament.